Mary, thank you so much for your time and coming for this interview in this glorious environment with moa behind us and tuis chirping around us. And what would be really good for us would be to hear a little bit from you about who you are, and so we can have a picture of you.
Thanks for inviting me to do this for you. My name is Mary Dillon, and I have lived now in Tauranga for 7 odd years. Fifth generation of family living in Tauranga. I have 6 children of my own, 13 grandchildren, and my children are scattered all over the world. 2 in Australia, 1 in Hong Kong, 1 in Canada, and 2 here. So the grandchildren are spread around the place as well, as you can imagine. But for a long time, I was 21 years. I was, I suppose, my longest occupation. I was an elected member of the Municipal Council. But these days, I chair Envirohub, which is an umbrella organisation for
Wow.
in Western Bay of Plenty and regional.
So you've got some ideas about how you think life should be, if having been so politically active. Can you tell us a little bit about your vision for your life for your family and grandchildren and Wakapuna and the wider society?
I think one of the things that's quite special about the Bay of Plenty is that it's called the Bay of Plenty, and we all came here because of that, because it was a plentiful place. And we stayed for exactly the same reason. And I think one of our tasks going forward now is to make sure that that remains like that for future generations. And I don't think we can continue to do that by constantly taking resources from the earth and not putting anything back. I think we've got to the stage where we now have to think of ourselves as part of nature rather than humanity and nature, and we constantly take. And we sit outside, but I think we're part of that massive eco-cycle, and we need to take back our rightful place in it so that we function as that eco-cycle. And I think the time is running out where we might be able to do that. That's what we've got to be particularly conscious of in relation to climate change.
Yes, I was just thinking that as you were talking, that we've been trying to get this to the fore for 40, 50 years. And so I'm wondering about the urgency that you're feeling at the moment.
Yes, I think there's 2 sorts of emergencies. You've got the emergency of COVID, for instance, which is here and now and immediate. But what climate change is an emerging emergency. And the beauty about that is we've actually got time to do something, but we haven't got a lot of time. If we haven't taken big steps by 2030, then I think we're putting ourselves on a trajectory where we might be able to do things about it, but it will be a huge cost, and that cost always falls in everything needs to be stable to sustain it. And I think that's something that we're very conscious of. We can act together now, or we can act later on, and some people will benefit by that and a whole lot of people will.
What sort of things do you think we should be doing? Like you're saying 2030, we need to be acting by 2030. What do we need to be doing by 2030?
By 2030 this year, we need to have reduced our carbon footprint by about 50% in the Bay of Plenty. And one of the big issues here is clearly transport. It's the biggest issue of the lot. We are some of the worst emitters in all of New Zealand, in Tauranga and Tauranga Sea in particular. And it's usually one person, one car. So we've got a lot of work to do to change that culture so that we actually can start meeting some of those targets. And I think they'll only change when the community actually demands that they do. And I don't think that's a space we're in yet, but we need to actually get there. And I think one of the things that you mentioned before, you're commenting about democracy, and I think the missing component in democracy is people, and particularly middle New Zealand. And one of the things that's really interesting is to see that every time you look at a survey in Tauranga, everybody says the top thing that they value is the environment. And yes, that's the thing that we take from every day. But governments and local authorities and people will change when they know the people in the middle of New Zealand have got their backs and they really want to take the actions with them that will help those things change. And I think that's a space we really need to do a lot of advocacy to actually get into. It's over to us.
Right.
And I think we really need to
Right.
take that if you like, task on very seriously.
Yes. This isn't something that we've suggested we would ask you, but I'm curious as to how you think we might be able to get that middle New Zealand, getting the backs of the politicians to make the decisions that many of them know that we should be making.
I honestly think that to get it as part of a culture, I think one of the things that we've forgotten as we live in towns and cities is that we're actually part of nature. It's easy to live in a town or city and be disconnected. Sure, you can relate to a tree, but the actual feel of nature and how good it makes you feel when you're in nature, it starts to get stripped out of cities as they get more and more dense and more people live in them. And I think it's quite possible to bring that back. And there are movements all over the world. London National Park City, for instance, is one, and that's one we're hoping to replicate. We're street by street, individual by individual, you're returning people to nature so that you do things like, you grow things in your own backyard. Your streets all of a sudden are not for cars, they're for people, but they're for biodiversity as well. And all of those things make a difference. Every time you take a step in favour of the climate, you take a small step in favour of climate change. And I think that's kind of where we need to go. So I think I think we need a movement, just like we had for Manapuri and we had for the Springbok Tour and we had for women's suffrage, that actually includes all the people in Middle New Zealand who are going to think differently about the way they live their lives.
Right.
And that's a pretty big task, but I think it can be accomplished, and I think it needs to be individual by individual, street by street, community by community, and then it becomes part of the way we live, not something we've just wrapped around people for a while or two and then we go away. We go back to our old ways. We need to change the way people think about themselves. And I think Kate Rayworth had a lot to say about that. And she said, we need to thrive before we grow, and rather than grow so that only some people thrive. And I think that we need to swap those two around. We thrive first, grow. The growth will be an inevitability as a result of that, but it will be the right sort of growth.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to this interview, given that we're focusing on the climate and ecological crisis, and that you're part of the Extinction Rebellion election roadshow? Is there anything else that you think you would like to add?
Well, I think if we can't respond to climate change, if we don't get climate change right, then the rest of it doesn't matter that much. And there are those things, isn't it, for us? It's transport here, it's how we look after our water, it's how we manage our waste, it's how we manage biodiversity. All of those things are part and parcel of saying that we need to rethink the way we live in order to meet those climate change carbon reduction targets. And as I say, the first thing for here is transport. Waste would be the second thing. And then the third thing is all those other things, the way we consume, and all the rest of it go out, falls part of that. But I, unless we do, one of the things about climate change is it's this thing, and yet individuals need to do things that are this thing, and they need to do them every day. And once they do them, or once they start doing them, then they buy into the bigger dream. That's where we need them to be prior to 2030. So we've got 10 years to make that difference.
10 years.
It's a big mission.
It is. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon and for being part of this election roadshow, and know that there are people all around the country giving their heart to the roadshow that we're collecting, and encouraging people to think about the way they vote. Thank you.